Ich glaube, das Kostbarste, das es für alle von uns gibt, ist das Milieu, das physische Milieu, das uns umgibt und alle unsere Tätigkeiten, Aktionen, Funktionen.
Das ist die erste Voraussetzung für alle anderen Überlegungen Neutras. Der Architekt plant unsere Umgebung. Unsere Umgebung aber wirkt auf uns ein. Sie stört uns oder beruhigt uns. Ob wir uns also wohlfühlen oder nicht, dafür ist der Architekt verantwortlich, wenn er zum Zug kommt.
Raymond, greetings. Welcome back to the Scheyer House.
Thank you. Whenever you guys are ready.
Raymond, it's wonderful to see you here in one of your father's great houses.
Well, it's always great to discover one that you didn't know before. So, yes, I'm my father's youngest son by 12 years from my next sibling. And my older brother was an architect, and he was a partner with my father. But I read this book here as a precocious teenager about how architecture affects the human brain and how research about those effects would be helpful to architects. So I decided to go into a career of research medicine and ended up being an environmental epidemiologist. But I've come back to this world of architecture because I've taken over from my brother as the president of the Neutra Institute for Survival Through Design, which my dad started in 1962, and it hopes to not only preserve and share that, both the imagery legacy, but also the ideas legacy, but also to try to use that reputation to be helpful to today's designers that care about people and the planet. So, of course, we're interested that this place is taking on a new life. Tell me a little bit about what the plans are for this place.
Yes, well, by wonderful, fortuitous series of circumstances, when the house came up for sale last year, it attracted the attention of Max Grimminger, who is an enthusiastic art collector and also has interest in intersections between architecture and art and other disciplines. And so he had the idea that it could become a residency for artists of the kind that Galka Scheyer so strongly supported in her work. And sort of more specifically, she always had the idea that this place could be a home or sort of a second home for the particular artists with whom she was associated. And this is the group that she called the Blue Four: Wassily Kandinsky, Paul Klee, Lyonel Feininger, and Alexej von Jawlensky, who in fact never came to stay in the apartment upstairs that was added to the house. She also wanted Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo to come stay here, which they weren't able to. Moholy-Nagy did come, but it was a sort of unfulfilled dream of hers that this fantastic airship, as she called it, almost in the sky, overlooking Los Angeles below, could be a place where artists could receive inspiration and develop their vision. She died in 1945, relatively young age, and the house passed into other hands. But I think it's wonderful that it's now returning to its original purpose as a notable work of architecture that is also a place where artistic visions will develop. So this idea of environmental, the sort of environmental aspects of design will be alive and well in the future.
So we're sitting in a cloud today.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big storm coming in, and you can't see what a spectacular view there is today. We came winding up, what is it, about 4 miles from Sunset Boulevard, back and forth, and finally along a very almost undeveloped road to get to this place, narrow road. And I just trying to imagine what it was like in 1934 to be up here. It would be, how she even got a road up here is astounding.
Yeah, I mean, there was no other house in the immediate vicinity, so the road had to be extended to reach this house. And because she was sort of the first resident, she got to name the street. And the name that she chose, with the permission of the whatever LA city office was involved, was Blue Heights Drive. And of course, this is blue after her beloved Blue 4. And there's also some numerology involved with the number, the street address, 1880, variations on 4, I suppose. So this is her place. There's a wonderful letter that I found where she was writing. She would write these sort of group letters to the Blue 4. In August 1933, she writes, "You drive from the boulevard up a slowly climbing serpentine route where views suddenly open up that can only be compared to the French Riviera. And the higher you go, the more your soul is at ease. And when you are on top, you are in the kingdom of the gods." And all of this for $150, because an idealistic German-American who works as a film unit manager and technical director, this is Hans von Morhardt, who later also became an actor playing bit parts in anti-Nazi films, Gestapo Agent Number 2 and this kind of thing, which a lot of the emigre actors had to do.
This boy was arrested in the company of a girl who is unquestionably a member of the underground.
But I tell you she's not. Why don't you keep quiet till your superiors are talking?
He had, after 3 years of looking, found several such locations and had himself built a house on such a hill mountain peak. The architect Neutra introduced us, and I now own the most beautiful piece of land that one could possibly dream of, and Neutra will build a house on it. So let's start with your father and his career, his life up to this point. How did he come to America, and where did he stand circa 1933, 1934 when this house was built?
So my father, like Rudolf Schindler, trained in Imperial Vienna before World War I. And while Schindler left in 1913, my father was caught up in the war and spent 4 years hauling an artillery piece and riding horses through Bosnia and Croatia and Albania. And he had discovered Frank Lloyd Wright, which fascinated him, and he and Schindler both wanted to come and work for Wright, which ultimately they did. And he had a mentor, Adolf Loos, who had been in the United States in the late 1800s and was a big enthusiast for America, that this was a place where new ideas would find a home. A lot of people were reading about Henry Ford, who was using factory methods to make automobiles affordable for even the workers in his plants, and he thought that a similar approach would be possible for making affordable houses, apartments, schools, clinics, libraries, what have you. So the idea is that the architect can then serve a much wider clientele. After the war, things were a disaster in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It fell apart, and all the smart Hungarians went to Budapest, and all the smart Czechs went back to Prague. And so there was really no opportunity there, but he managed to go to Switzerland and stayed at a sort of a convalescent home run by a Czech nurse. And it happened that that Czech nurse was a good friend of my maternal grandparents, and my father met that family and fell in love with my mother, who was the oldest of those girls, and it was a very musical family. And my mother was a singer and cellist. But he was able then to work with the landscape architect Gustav Amann, and had a predilection towards landscape in any case, judging by letters that he was writing even before the war. And then he got a job in Germany, in Luckenwalde, doing workers' houses and also a forest cemetery. And this was very controversial because it had a crematorium and it was non-denominational. And the Catholics and the Lutherans who had their own cemeteries were not appreciative of that. But so he had this landscape experience, and then he had a chance to work with the architect Eric Mendelsohn and was chief draftsman and designer for a number of buildings then. And they won an award for a library design in Haifa, and this was enough money for him then finally to come to the United States. And he got a job with Halliburton and Root designing the Palmer House, new hotel. And then he met Frank Lloyd Wright at Louis Sullivan's funeral. He had been corresponding with him, and finally was able to work at Taliesin East for about half a year, the last half of 1924. In February of 1925, he arrived at King's Road at Schindler's house at his invitation. So 1925 marks the centennial of his arrival and the beginning of his American career. And we're having a number of events to celebrate that. This film being one of them in a way, because the next 5 years were very busy, both for Neutra and Schindler as partners, but for each of them individually. And in particular, my father was writing a lot, and he wrote a book called Wie baut Amerika, How America Builds, about all these technological abilities that were not yet present in Europe. And then he wrote another book more about the modernists in the United States. So he and Schindler submitted a submission for the League of Nations, a new League of Nations building, and they had an honorary mention. Together they designed the Jardinette apartments, which are being restored as we speak, and will be affordable housing in Hollywood by the end of the year. And he designed the Lovell Health House. So in 1930, after the crash, he decided to go on a world tour and go back to Europe to join the International Congress of Modernism in Belgium. And he was invited to lecture because of these books that he had written, which were well known. So that he became quite a celebrity. People knew about him in Japan, people knew about him in various parts of Germany, and he was invited to teach at the Bauhaus in Dessau for a couple of weeks by Mies van der Rohe. And he had met Gropius in 1928 when Gropius came to Los Angeles. I had the opportunity to actually meet Mr. Gropius at the end of his life, and he mentioned this visit to Los Angeles in 1928, and that he, since then, had been going every summer to Arizona to ride horses. And I said, so what do you think about Los Angeles now? So this is 1969. He said, I never went back to Los Angeles. And so here he was the head of the Graduate School of Design in Boston, but was not curious to see what had been happening through the 50s, case study houses, all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, talk about a difference in personality. My father was very curious, and if there was anything to be seen, he would break a schedule and go and do it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so by the time that he got back, we were deep in the Depression, right? Philip Johnson got him a job designing an aluminum bus for his father's company, and that money sort of kept him going for a while. Kees van der Leeuw, who he had met in Holland, the great patron of modern architecture with his modern factory in Rotterdam, he came to Los Angeles, and my father took him around, and at the end of the day, van der Leeuw asked, well, where is your house? And my father said, well, I'm renting a bungalow in Elysian Park. I can't afford a house. And whereupon van der Leeuw pulled out his checkbook and said, how much do you need? And gave him a loan of $3,000, which was about half of a typical house. And so with that money plus donations by various manufacturers, in 1932 he finished his studio and residences, which accommodated a couple of households plus his little office on Silver Lake Boulevard. So that brings us up to the time that he would have gotten the commission for this house, and the designs would have been done on Silver Lake Boulevard. And he had known Galka Scheyer because they had interacted at King's Road, and for whatever reason, she didn't choose J.R. Davidson, or she didn't choose Schindler, but chose my father to design this house.
Yeah, well, we can pick up the story of Scheyer from there. I think first of all, it's just to get a sense of what was going on in the 1920s and early 1930s in Los Angeles. It was an extraordinarily interesting and creative place. And of course, LA is always smeared together with Hollywood, but there are so many developments that were independent of Hollywood all along. There was modern art here, Stanton McDonald White and Peter Krasnow and other painters. There was Edward Weston, path-breaking photography. There were interesting early activities in modern music. The LA Phil was up and running and playing Mahler and a little bit of Schoenberg. Schoenberg himself came in 1934. And so it was a creative place. And there was also, I think, specifically an atmosphere that was receptive to modernist architecture. The reason, really, that we're here, the reason that Schindler and your father were in Los Angeles goes back to Aileen Barnsdall, the oil heiress, who hired Frank Lloyd Wright to build a house for her. It was supposed to be a much larger sort of cultural complex, Hollyhock House, down in way down the hill. And Schindler was working for Wright at that time, and when Wright went off to Japan, Schindler took over the Hollyhock House project. And Schindler, who had no intention of lingering here, fell in love with the place and settled, built his great Kings Road house, one of the real landmarks of early residential modernist architecture. And Neutra and Schindler, having known each other from Vienna, this became an obvious destination for your father when he wanted to come over here. And so it's sort of this chain of connections that kept building up. And there was specifically this German-speaking community that was forming. We think of this great wave of emigres and exiles starting in the 30s as people were fleeing Nazi Germany, but it had begun before. So we had Schindler and your father. We had some important early figures in Hollywood, Ernst Lubitsch and F.W. Murnau, and we had Galka Scheyer. She came to America in 1924. She was born in Braunschweig in 1889, had trained as an artist and was an artist of considerable talent, sort of beginning in a sort of neo-impressionist style and then sort of moving into modernism. She studied in England, Belgium, and Switzerland, as well as, of course, in Germany, and France as well. And it was in Lausanne in Switzerland in 1916 that she met Jawlensky. And her encounter with Jawlensky and his art made such an overwhelming impression on her that she decided largely to give up her own artistic endeavors and to throw herself into the support of the modern art movement. A little later, the Bauhaus, she met the other members of the Blue Four, Kandinsky, Klee, and Feininger. And then almost immediately she had the idea that she would go to America in order to whip up enthusiasm for this group here. Now, these painters weren't especially well known in America at the time. There was rising interest in modern art, but those names weren't necessarily known. And so she was in New York, not a great deal of interest in New York, so she went to San Francisco, got a little more attention in San Francisco. She was described as the prophetess of the Blue Four in one San Francisco newspaper headline. And then in 1925, the summer of 1925, she came to Los Angeles. She made a connection with Schindler through a friend and stayed at the great Kings Road house. Started encountering the people in the Schindler circle, including Edward Weston and many other interesting figures. And increasingly, LA became attractive to her as a base. She thought this would be the place where she could sort of build her movement. She traveled widely at the end of the 20s, early 30s. She was in Bali, among other places, brought back many Balinese objects, which would have been all around us. And by 1933, she had gone back to Germany, and she managed, as Hitler was coming to power, to get hold of a huge quantity of works by the Blue Four and other artists, really rescuing a large quantity of very significant art. So by 1933, she was back in the summer and ready to start this project of building the house. And so the plans were done in 1933, and by the beginning of 1934, January or February, she was moving in, although construction was still continuing. I think in the end, what's wonderful about this place is that it is a fusion, I think, of her sensibilities and your father's sensibilities. It is a masterpiece of modernist architecture, but it is also, this room in particular, a fantastic small gallery space. You know, if you imagine the view blocked out for certain occasions. And you know, this was her idea. You know, it was the gallery in the clouds, and so she would have her Blue Four paintings and other work exhibited here, and curiosity seekers would drive up the hill. It became a little bit of a fashionable thing to do for the Hollywood set. So you would have Sternberg and Fritz Lang, the director, the actors, Edward G. Robinson and Marlene Dietrich. Greta Garbo apparently came. Unfortunately, not all of them ended up buying anything. It was just sort of an experience that you were sort of, people like to have, that woman with the gallery up in the hills. But slowly she did build attention for these artists. I mean, let's talk about the space itself. And you know, people talk about a few different phases in your father's career. Early on, it was a somewhat severe form of modernism. And you think of the Lovell House, this glass and steel colossus, a rather imposing architectural object. And you know, over the 1930s and into the 1940s, there was an evolution, a sort of mellowing out, I think you could say, but also an increasing awareness of the landscape and how, you know, to find the location for these houses so that they would interact with the landscape in an ideal way. So how would you sort of position this house in that general spectrum of your father's development?
It's interesting, isn't it? That the severity relates to the materials, right? The white walls and starting to have the frames of the windows painted silver, and it was then in the furniture that a little warmth would be introduced. But I think increasingly clients were interested in introducing redwood and textured brick and so forth. So towards the end of the 30s, you begin seeing that more and more in his work. The orientation to nature starts pretty early, really, with the, we were just at the Lovell Health House, which is a few months from being fully restored. And it doesn't have the strong relationship to the view even than this house does. That appears with the VDL house that was chosen to be next to the Silver Lake Reservoir and put the living room on the second floor so that it would look over Silver Lake Boulevard to the lake and have a folding steel gas station door really fold open onto a balcony that would make a indoor-outdoor experience.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the Lovell House versus the subsequent houses. The Lovell House, I mean, it is enormous, and it does have a feeling, especially when you're looking at it from below, of this almost like a spaceship, which is just docked against the hill. It doesn't necessarily seem to emerge from the landscape, whereas this house, I think, has more of the feeling of being nestled in. I mean, partly it's also the scale of it. It's a quite small house, especially in the first version of it, with no apartment upstairs, and so it's a lower lying, subtler, almost a kind of hideout, which is barely visible from the road, and does not make an imposing impression. And yet, there is this gigantic feeling to it. I mean, when we have the full view, we have the sense of hovering above the space, and there was a lovely...
This is an unusually high ceiling, too, which
the gallery function. Galka Scheyer wrote just after she moved in, again, one of her letters to the Blue Four, "My bed stands in an alcove, and a wide door stands open, which now leads to a steep slope about 400 feet down the mountain. Later there will be a wall enclosing my little private garden. At night, my eyes look up to the stars and then stray along the mountain peaks, which are capped by snow and which the morning sun roasts at 6:30. This after the owl has hooted through the night and a sea of clouds lies below my mountain. It is as if I am in an airship." And so, this is really a early example of a particular kind of Los Angeles house, perhaps, certainly one of the first, the house that hovers above the basin and gives you this spectacular overview. And yeah, it has a certain insubstantial quality, translucent quality, and that's a very, I think, significant aspect of where it stands in the evolution of your father's work. So there was the point at which, in the mid-30s, after she'd moved in, she was very happy with the house, but she felt she wanted a little more space. And so she had the idea that a second story, a little upstairs apartment could be added. And this was the space that she really wanted to offer to artists. She would continue to live down here in her little bedroom, and the artists would come stay upstairs. She wrote to Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera in 1937, "I have a whole painter's apartment for your disposition, which I built for the Blue Four and other great artists. It has 2 rooms with steel sliding doors and windows opening onto little roof gardens, a bath and a kitchenette, and a special entrance made for 2 people." Your father did not design this extra space and recommended his protege, Gregory Ain. That was finished in 1936 or 1937. And as we said earlier, unfortunately, it never had that, fulfilled that purpose. But now, with the new phase of the house, it will become a place for great artists to develop their work. Which leads me to ask about your own work with the Institute and the applications of these ideas, not only your father's ideas, but also Scheyer's at the present moment. What do you feel are the opportunities going forward as, tragically, there is a great deal of rebuilding that needs to be done?
Yeah. So the Institute originally had the mission of trying to use my father's reputation to provide support for people who were doing environmental psychology research or neuroscience research, or people who were doing a kind of designing that was aiming for the benefit of people in a broad clientele and for the planet, environmentally responsible design. And this didn't pan out back in 1962 when the Institute was started. After my father's death, my brother continued it and was more focused on preserving both the written and the designed legacy. And we decided a few years ago to reintroduce the original mission. So we really have two missions that are aimed at different audiences in a way. The sharing and preserving both the built and the drawn and the written legacy is a more traditional kind of thing for preserving an artist's or an architect's work. And it is directed towards fans who appreciate these things as works of art. It includes people who are stimulated by the ideas or either finding agreement or disagreement as a productive thing, and students and journalists. And I know that you found it useful to go through that archive because he was such a networker, so curious that there's contacts with scientists and artists and architects and politicians and people of all kinds. And then the other mission is trying to use this legacy to be helpful to today's designers and really developers and clients. And the ultimate goal is to have people who make decisions about what is built care enough to make sure that it's aimed towards people and the planet and not the cheapest thing to do and not the most flamboyant thing to do.
Well, it all sounds fantastic and also intersecting with the new mission of this house and the propagation of Galka Scheyer's ideas. And so these paths are still intersecting Scheyer and Neutra going into the future, as well as this entire fantastic history of the emigres in Los Angeles. Of course, neither Neutra nor Scheyer were technically emigres. They were just immigrants. They came to America, settled here in the 1920s. But later in the 30s and 40s came this extraordinary wave of Schoenberg and Korngold, Fritz Lang, Billy Wilder, Otto Preminger, the writers, the brothers Thomas and Heinrich Mann, and on and on and on. And so it is so important to have places of memory where this extraordinary history is preserved. We have, of course, already the Villa Aurora, Leon Feuchtwanger's house, and the Thomas Mann house. And I should mention that Benno Hertz of the Thomas Mann house has been absolutely crucial also in this project. And now we have, yes, another in a way, residential monument of that time in Los Angeles history, which I think a lot of people don't know enough about. I mean, that's why I'm writing my book on the subject, and particularly at a time of grave threat to American democracy, at a time where refugees and exiles all over the world are seeking refuge. These stories are more important than ever. So going forward, these stories will continue to blossom and make us think about how the arts and architecture really interact with people's fundamental lives and needs and aspirations in a very real and visceral way. So she deserves to be remembered, and this house, I think, and the legacy of this house is the most important thing that she left behind.
So this must be, what, 90-year-old piece of paper.
Yes.